The email came in at exactly 2:30 a.m. Just as the cabin lights dimmed and the São Paulo skyline disappeared beneath a stretch of soft, dark cloud, I blinked at the screen, half convinced it hadn't fully loaded. But the words didn't shift. My name, my role, and one line that felt colder than the air outside the fuselage. Your employment with Venturon Technologies has been terminated. Effective, immediately. No call. No meeting. No explanation. Just those words. Delivered with the efficiency of a final transaction. My access had already been revoked. I was instructed not to return to any company property. The sender was Grayson Hart himself, the CEO who'd shaken my hand 2 weeks earlier and said, "You're the only one I trust to land this." I looked up. Everyone else in business class was asleep, curled into their pods beneath beige blankets and eye masks. Wine glasses half finished on their trays, the hum of the engines pressed against the quiet. But inside me, something had dropped into a stillness, so complete it felt like vacuum. My heart didn't race. My breath didn't catch. It was just silence. Total and clean. 10 days. 3 continents. Tokyo for alignment. London for compliance. São Paulo for the close. I hadn't just managed the deal. I had built it. Architected every part of it over 10 months. A $1.5 billion partnership, stretched across 5 years and 3 of the world's most difficult telecom firms. And now I didn't even work there. I stared at the screen, waiting for something. Emotion. Confusion. A reaction. But there was nothing. No heat. Not yet. Just the surreal quiet of a ground vanishing beneath your feet mid-step. Then I reached beneath my seat, unlatched a second bag, and pulled out the matte black laptop no one at Venturon knew existed. No logos, no stickers. Just weight and silence. I opened it, logged in, watched the screen glow back to life. They thought they were ending my story. They didn't know I had already begun writing a different one. 6 months earlier, I'd started keeping a private archive, not out of paranoia. Out of pattern recognition. I had seen what happened to people who gave too much to places that didn't know how to hold it. So I built something outside their system. Quietly. Cleanly. Legally. I had the full draft of every proposal. Every client revision. Every call summary and handwritten note. Every number that mattered in the Trident deal. Locked. Encrypted. And untouchable. They thought revoking my email would revoke my influence. They thought firing me mid-air would take me out of the equation. They had no idea they'd just cut the last thread tying me to their permission. I leaned back in my seat, the laptop still glowing on the tray table. I could see the soft curve of the equator on the horizon, a pale blue line stitched into the darkness. I didn't feel anger. I felt something sharper. Relief. Because now, it was official. The bridge was burned. The roles were clear. And I was no longer the one keeping them whole. I turned back to the screen, opened a new document, and typed 3 words. Let's begin. 3 weeks before I was fired mid-air, I stood at the head of a boardroom while grown men with 6-figure suits and 7-figure salaries panicked over a collapsing $400 million contract. The deal was crumbling. A European consortium had walked out mid-negotiation. Legal was spiraling. Finance was in blame mode. And the VP of Global Sales looked like he might actually cry. No one had answers. So I didn't wait to be asked. I walked in, took the abandoned proposal from the table, rewrote the core structure in 20 minutes, and scheduled a private call with the head delegate before the hour was out. By the next morning, not only was the deal salvaged, it had expanded. 2 new territories, better terms, the client re-engaged, and the contract moved forward like nothing had ever gone wrong. There was a champagne toast the next day in the executive lounge. People clapped, smiled, and said things like miracle work and classic Rebecca. Grayson gave me one of those weightless smiles and said, "That's the kind of leadership we need at the next level." Someone in the hallway whispered about a promotion. Executive Vice President. Global Stratege. The title sounded bloated. And late. Because I wasn't just the fixer. I was the firewall. The one they called when the stakes were high and the room started spinning. I'd worked in 3 languages in a single day. Brokered deals with oil magnates and telecom CEOs. I'd flown overnight to patch over political fallout. Rewritten terms on napkins. And memorized contract law across regions. I carried a backup phone. And a backup passport. I made Venturon look far more stable than it was. But the promotion never came. A week after the toast. I was told the decision was in process. Then it was under review. Then it was just quiet. At first, I told myself the story I thought professionals were supposed to believe. HR delays. Organizational restructuring. Timing. Maybe it wasn't personal. Then I heard them. I was setting up for a portfolio review in the conference room next to the board lunch. The sliding door had been left just slightly ajar. One board member laughed. "Rebecca's brilliant," he said. "But let's be honest. She walks into a room, and no guy wants to speak." Another voice joined in. "Yeah. She's not exactly EVP material. She's more field ops." Field ops. That phrase sat in my chest like a stone. I wasn't a leader. In their minds. I was an operator. A tool. Something they could fly into the mess. Let me fix it. And then quietly disappear until the next fire. I stood there with the portfolio I'd spent 3 weeks building. Listening to them rewrite my value like it was a logistical function. I didn't cry. I didn't storm out. I just listened. Because in that moment, the noise cleared. And what I heard underneath was simple. They didn't want to promote me. They wanted to contain me. Too polished. Too precise. Too many wins they couldn't reassign or take credit for. I was good enough to save them. But never safe enough to stand beside them. That was the moment it stopped being about merit. And started being about threat, so I went back to my desk. Booked flights to 3 continents. And threw everything I had into the Trident deal. Because if they weren't going to give me the title, I was going to build something that made titles irrelevant. A year earlier, Mallory Hart made a mistake that should have ended her career. She was new to Venturon. Hired in under the vague title of strategic advisor. No technical background. Barely 2 years of experience. But she was Grayson Hart's daughter. And that seemed to qualify her for things the rest of us had to earn. During a high-stakes demo with a pilot client in Singapore, she initiated a live data transfer she didn't understand, exposing confidential partner information in real time. Within minutes, the legal team went into crisis mode. Marketing froze. Compliance panicked. It should have gone public. But it didn't. Because Grayson called me. She didn't mean to. He said, "She just didn't know. Clean it up. Quietly." And I did. I pulled every favor I had. I reframed the exposure as a beta test glitch. I redirected press inquiries and made sure her name never made it into a single internal memo. I even took the media call myself so no one would trace the mistake back to her. No one thanked me. I didn't expect them to. Back then, I called it loyalty. Loyalty to the company. To the work. To the idea that protecting the whole meant sometimes protecting the weak spots. I didn't realize loyalty rots when it's not mutual. 3 days before my final trip across continents, I opened our shared drive to finalize the Trident pitch deck. It was a file I'd been shaping for weeks. Analytics. Structure. Client language. Legal nuances. Every detail was intentional. The deck was still there. But the author was listed as Mallory Hart. At first, I thought it was a sync issue. Maybe she had opened it. Maybe she'd saved over it by accident. Then I looked closer. The layout was mine. The phrasing, the pacing, the logic. All mine. She'd reworded a few headers, swapped out some formatting. But the framework, the language, the flow, it was me. She had copied it, edited it, and put her name on it. Without a message, without a call, without even the courtesy of pretending it was a collaboration. That night, I sat in my apartment with the city lights glowing beyond the glass and stared at that deck until the words stopped meaning anything. And then I did something I wasn't proud of. I closed the file. I didn't confront her. I didn't loop in legal. I didn't message Grayson. Because I knew exactly what would happen if I did. They'd call it teamwork. They'd say I was being territorial. They'd label it a misunderstanding or worse, that word they always reach for when a woman refuses to be erased. Emotional. So I said nothing. I packed my bags, reviewed the new flight routes I'd arranged in secret, and told myself it didn't matter. But it did. Because this wasn't just betrayal. It was a slow redirection of credit. A quiet removal of voice. Every time someone praised her strategic clarity, every time I heard my own language come out of her mouth like she'd written it, I had protected her. Now she was erasing me. Not with malice. With ease. Like it was hers all along. And I realized then, this wasn't an accident. It was strategy. But I had a strategy too. I just wasn't going to announce it. 6 months before that plane ride. Before the forced smiles and backroom whispers. I started building something quietly. Not because I was planning to leave. But because I was done waiting to be chosen. I didn't storm out. I didn't threaten to quit. I just started shifting my energy somewhere no one at Venturon could touch. I called it Trevant. No public filings. No press. Just a legal entity and a single document stored on a secure drive. Then I made a few calls. Not many. Just the right ones. Engineers who had once pitched breakthrough ideas only to be sidelined for thinking too fast. Product strategists who had been told their work was too bold. Too early. Too hard to scale. Compliance leads who questioned decisions and were quietly pushed out for being difficult. They didn't need convincing. They had lived it too. Venturon hadn't always been like this. When I joined, it was scrappy. Ambitious. Alive. You could speak up without being punished. You could move fast without asking permission. But as the money poured in, something shifted. We stopped hiring the best people and started promoting the safest ones. Innovation got replaced with process. Risk became a liability instead of a signal. The soul of the company didn't erode all at once. It faded. So I decided to build something that didn't just reject the rot. It repaired it. Trevant wasn't a revenge company. It wasn't created to burn bridges. It was designed to be the bridge that should have existed all along. No hierarchies bloated with politics. No compliance used as a weapon. Just speed, clarity, and trust, written into the code. Not just the culture. I didn't pitch it. I didn't recruit. But slowly, something shifted. People started coming to me. Clients, partners, legal teams from abroad. It started subtly. A side call. A private coffee. A quiet comment after a meeting. They weren't asking about Venturon. They were asking about me. And one night in São Paulo, after a long day of negotiation, Luiz Mata, the CEO of Brasilink, sat across from me with his tie loosened and a half-empty glass of whiskey. He leaned forward. Serious. Steady. Why aren't you running the company? I laughed. Because what else could I do? Someone else inherited it. I said. He didn't laugh. If you ever decide to change that, he said, call me. Some of us prefer to back leaders, not logos. I didn't forget those words. Because deep down, I already knew what he saw. They all saw it. I was the one they trusted. The one doing the work. The one showing up when no one else knew how. The company name didn't carry the deal anymore. I did. So I kept building. Encrypted channels. Secure backups. A skeleton team who knew how to work in shadows. We didn't wear the logo. We didn't need to. We had something better. Credibility. They had the title. I had the trust. And when everything fell apart later, when the headlines would try to explain how a company lost 3 legacy clients in under a week, they'd miss the truth entirely. They didn't lose to a competitor. They lost to the person they never expected would stop asking for permission. Me. The ballroom gleamed in gold and glass. A quartet played softly beneath chandeliers. And servers moved between tables, balancing trays of champagne flutes and tiny sculpted appetizers. Everything shimmered with intention. This wasn't just a company celebration. It was theater. And like all good theater, it had a script. I stood near the back of the room. One hand around a glass I hadn't touched. The other clenched lightly behind my back. A branded step and repeat had been set up near the stage. And the guests, executives, partners, board members, flowed around it like it meant something. The placards read Strategic Growth Gala. But everyone knew what was coming. Mallory Hart was being promoted to Vice President of International Strategy. She stepped onto the stage in a navy sheath dress and a perfectly timed smile, flanked by 2 board members who didn't know the first thing about what it had taken to build the department they were now handing her. I built that strategy arm from a suitcase and a shared slide deck, from overnight flights and 3 a.m. Zoom calls with legal teams in 3 languages. When I pitched international expansion 3 years ago, they called it premature. Now, it was a crowning achievement, just with someone else's name on the plaque. Mallory lifted her glass and began to speak. "I'm honored to carry this vision forward," she said, "and so grateful for the foundation this team has laid." No mention of me. Not a word. I wasn't surprised. Then came Grayson. Still tall. Still perfectly pressed. He stepped up beside her and took the mic with the ease of a man who believed his version of events would always become the official one. "We've watched Mallory grow into this role," he said, "and I can think of no one better to lead our next phase. Our global expansion through the Trident Partnership." Polite applause. Then he glanced sideways. "And she'll be shadowing Rebecca on the upcoming trip. To ensure a seamless transition. Shadowing me. As if I had agreed to it. As if I was training her. As if the woman who had quietly taken my work, my department, and my credit was now learning from me. Like it was some kind of structured mentorship. People clapped again. I smiled. I didn't flinch. Didn't blink. Because what they didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I had already changed my itinerary. I had rerouted my flights through private channels, bypassed the company calendar, and removed all traces of my travel details from shared systems. As far as they were concerned, I was going where they expected. When they expected, but I wasn't. Mallory wouldn't be shadowing anyone, and the deal she thought she was inheriting, she'd never see it happen. Later, near the bar, she found me. Her tone was bright, almost girlish. "I hope we'll have time to go over the Sao Paulo structure before we land," she said. "I'm still catching up on the European stuff." I nodded. "You should. They tend to ask tough questions." She laughed. "Oh. I'll just point them to you. You always know what to say." I smiled. The kind of smile that comes just before a door locks from the inside. Because this was never about proving myself. It was about knowing exactly when to stop letting people borrow my light. And that moment, beneath chandeliers and hollow applause, was exactly the right time. Tokyo hit like a cold current. Quiet. Sharp. Precise. I landed 12 hours before anyone at Venturon expected me to. Having rerouted through Buenos Aires to avoid shared calendars and internal trackers, no one knew where I was. And that was exactly how I wanted it. The meeting with Telnova's CTO, Yuki Asano, began without small talk. He asked his first question before I even finished sitting down. "You all promise security," he said. "So do your competitors. Why should I believe you offer anything different?" I didn't flinch. I slid a folder across the table. Custom encryption specs. Jurisdictional compliance protocols. Zero trust architecture. Built quietly with the internal engineers. Venturon had stopped listening too long ago. Yuki read in silence. When he finished, he didn't compliment me. He just nodded once. "I see why they send you," he said. "The others speak. You understand?" We walked together down the glass hallway after the meeting. Just before he stepped into his car, I turned and asked, soft and deliberate, if there were a leaner model, same foundation, fewer layers, would you consider it? He didn't respond, but before the door closed, he looked back and said, "Send the materials." Privately, London was colder, but not in temperature. Eurocom's legal team didn't believe in niceties. Their general counsel, Linda Clark, met me in a paneled conference room and got straight to it. "Your standard contract language is ambiguous," she said. "You flagged this before. Why hasn't Venturon fixed it?" "They didn't," I replied. "I did." I handed her a revised agreement. One I'd restructured myself the night before in a rented flat using templates built with Jenna Park, our former legal lead who now worked quietly with Trevant. Linda flipped through the first few pages, then stopped. "This isn't what your team sent over last month." "No," I said. "It's what will actually work." She set the folder down, studying me with the kind of look that scans for motive. Then certainty. "You wrote this?" "Yes." "Off the record." Linda raised an eyebrow. "Maybe next time. You'll be sitting on this side of the table." The comment was casual, but the implication wasn't. She didn't just like the contract. She trusted me more than the logo on my badge. By the time I reached São Paulo, I was held together by caffeine and instinct. The meeting with Luiz Mata, CEO of Brasilink, was the final leg. 4 hours in a room with no windows. Every minute spent dissecting risk models, revenue splits, and long-term support plans. I knew the numbers. I knew the pressure points. I stood my ground. Not because I was backed by Venturon's board, but because I knew what I had built was right. Louise finally leaned back. Hands folded. Expression unreadable. "I trust you, Rebecca," he said. "But I don't trust Venturon." I nodded. "If this falls apart later," he continued, "it won't. Unless you leave." I looked at him carefully, then lowered my voice. "And if there were a way," I said, "to keep everything intact, without the red tape, the noise, the politics, would you be open?" He didn't blink. "You already know the answer. 3 cities, 3 conversations, 3 different cultures, but the pattern was the same. They didn't want to deal with Venturon anymore. They wanted to deal with me. These weren't just client check-ins. They were departures in disguise. The morning after they fired me, I sat in a hotel room 3 blocks from Venturon's headquarters, watching the city move without me. No meetings, no calendars, no messages buzzing my phone, just stillness. I drank my coffee slowly. It had gone cold before I noticed. Then I opened the matte black laptop, the one they didn't know existed. No VPN. No sync. No trace. I logged into the secure client portal Rahim and Jenna had built from scratch. Clean and invisible. And I sent 3 emails. No subject lines. No attachments. Just 4 words in each message. "The door is open." 1 to Yuki Asano. 1 to Linda Clark. 1 to Luiz Maida. Nothing else. I didn't follow up. I didn't have to. By 10 that morning, Grayson had entered the executive floor expecting momentum. He was met with silence. He tried calling Tokyo first. No answer. He tried again. Voicemail. Then London. Linda Clark's line rang 7 times. Then dropped. He had someone from Investor Relations send a formal request for contract updates. The email bounced. Out of office. In São Paulo. Louise's assistant picked up. Is he available? Not for Venturon. By 11:30. Panic had set in. They scrambled to piece together what was happening. I could imagine it. The urgent meetings. The panicked threads. The questions no one could answer without implicating themselves. And I said nothing. In my room, I refreshed Travan's client dashboard. All 3 had logged in. All 3 had scheduled private onboarding calls with our team. No headlines. No press leaks. No statements. Just quiet motion. Back at Venturon. Someone floated the idea of a public clarification. A joint press release reaffirming the partnership. They sent drafts to all 3 clients. Only one responded. No greeting. No sign-off. Venturon no longer speaks for us. You do. I stared at that sentence longer than I expected. It wasn't loud. It didn't try to explain anything. It didn't have to. They weren't asking for more time. They weren't looking for reassurance. They had simply made a decision. And it was final. Mallory locked herself in the comms war room. I imagined her pacing. Calling the junior team in. Raising her voice just enough to sound in control. Even as the foundation cracked under her. Jenna sent me a Kate message. They think you're behind it. But no one can prove anything. The clients won't respond. They don't need to. I replied. Do you want to make a statement? I looked at the Trevant homepage. Clean. Silent. Unbranded. What we build belongs to those who build it. No. I typed. Let them sit in the silence a while longer. Because this wasn't sabotage. It was clarity. They thought firing me would erase my influence. They thought cutting my access would cut the thread. But influence isn't access. It's trust. And I had already carried it out the door in my hands. Not because I stole it. Because they gave it away when they decided I didn't matter. There were no lawsuits. No headlines. Just absence. And in the world they lived in, where noise meant control and perception was power, silence was the most dangerous answer of all. It wasn't nothing. It was a verdict. At 9:30 that morning, the press release went live. No launch party. No coordinated posts. Just a quiet announcement published through Trevant's secure portal. Distributed with precision. Trevant is proud to announce a multi-continent strategic partnership with Telnova, Eurocom, and Brasilink. The agreement, valued at $1.5 billion over 7 years, will deliver secure, modular cloud integration across 3 global markets. Signed. Rebecca. CEO. That was it. No legacy logos. No buried footnotes. Just one name. Front and center. Mine. But then o'clock. My inbox was already full. Not from old coworkers. From analysts. Journalists. Investors. People who hadn't even heard of Trevant 2 days ago. People who now wanted meetings. Wanted in. By 10:45. The first article dropped. Then 2 more. Then 6. By 11:15. A headline from TechWatch Global made me pause. The silent takeover. How one woman rewrote the game while they weren't looking. Inside Venturon. Silence had turned to chaos. Jenna texted me from someone still embedded in legal. They're spinning in circles. Grayson's on edge. Mallory's blaming the comms team. They think this was some orchestrated hit job. It wasn't. It was strategy. Quiet. Deliberate. Legal. No shortcuts. No noisy. At 12:20. A financial outlet called it the boldest power shift in enterprise tech since the AltaVix pivot. By 1. We'd received over 70 partnership inquiries. We didn't answer most of them. Not yet. Trevant was built to move, not to chase. The clients. Yuki. Linda. Louise. Never said a word. No quotes. No clarifications. They didn't need to explain. They'd already decided. At 2 p.m. Rahim walked into our shared workspace with a bottle of non-alcoholic champagne and a printed copy of the press release. He dropped it on the table. "You framing this, I might tattoo it," I said, smiling. He handed me a folder. Budget transfers. Legal confirmations. Implementation schedules already moving. Jenna had triple-checked every line. No delays. New questions. Later that night, I got a voicemail from a number I hadn't saved. Grayson. He didn't yell. He didn't beg. He just asked what they always ask once the damage is done. Was this personal? I deleted the message before it finished. Of course it was personal. It was also earned and overdue. I stood by the window of my new office. Overlooking a city that once felt indifferent, now it felt mine. Not because it bent, but because I stopped asking it to make room and built a space where I didn't need permission. They took everything with noise. I took everything back in silence. Not with revenge. With presence. 2 weeks later, I walked through the front doors of Trevant's headquarters just after sunrise. The space was open. Quiet. Focused. Sunlight cut through tall glass. The kind of morning that didn't ask for attention, but held it anyway. On the far wall, a plaque had been mounted. Brushed steel. Clean font. No fluff. Travant. Founded by Rebecca. Not a slide buried in a deck. Not a whisper in a hallway. Not a line cut from a press release. There. Permanent. I stood in front of it for a long moment. Hand resting lightly on the edge. They had once removed my name from the very work I built. Now it was the first thing anyone saw. This was never about revenge. It was about reclamation. They deleted me in silence. I built back louder, with results they couldn't ignore.